Hi. If you've seen my previous videos, you'll know that I'm struggling through job-wise, and well, I drank a little bit of this, and I had a little bit of this that's left, and I had a banana, so I'm feeling a bit better. Um, but I want to talk about something that I had actually the past couple of days. I thought about doing. It's probably yesterday, um, but I just now is the time to talk about it. I What prompted me was I was watching something on YouTube running alongside. This is something I like to do, watching YouTube or listening to it anyway, alongside going through this stupid application process. Um, in some sense, I like to turn my mind off in some sense and just almost be a different person when I'm filling out those stupid applications. But anyway, okay, I want to talk about my excuse any weird dishevelment in my appearance here, but I want to talk about Jewish my pride in Judaism. Um, the video that I was watching was an interview with somebody who was describing the religion that she had left and characterizing it as being cult, having attributes of being cult-like. And while I would say mainstream religions aren't really cults. Some might argue with certain religion here and there, but I have a lot of pride in being Jewish and my Jewish heritage. And believe it or not, the statistics I've seen are that Jews are about 1%, maybe 2% of the American population and like 1% of the world population. However, they've had such a dramatic influence on the world. I'm proud of that for one thing. But being in a very small minority, I mean, I saw something, I think the documentary was Religious, and I can't remember the comedian's name offhand, but he gave a graph. I believe that's the documentary. He gave a graph and he said there are like more NRA members than there are um, atheists, or so. And then Jews were. I remember the percentages, and it was like there are probably more atheists than there are Jews. I mean, it's a very small minority. So whatever the statistics, the Christians, and I lump Catholics in, and other Christian denominations in as Christianity in general. I don't know enough about Islam, but Christians dominate quite a bit of the world, at least in the Western world. They have this perception of Judaism, and they see the old, what they call the Old Testament, and they lack they're so dominant in terms of religion that people, I'm suspecting people think of Jews as just some variation of Christianity, and Judaism is not. Jewish religion is not. And I'd like to point out some differences, some distinct differences in terms of mindset, in terms of outlook on the world. There's somebody from my past that said, for whatever reason, I don't know what came up, but I don't remember whether, I don't remember how or if Judaism just came up, but she said I should have been born Jewish, and I just left it at that. But I don't. I'd like to ask what she meant by that. But um, I also think of, first of all, the number of differences, the distinct differences in terms of interpretation of the Bible. The Bible was written in Hebrew. It's a Jewish book. Christians took that and then have their own spin on certain things, but that's not the actual intended intentional. That's not the original intention. The intended interpretations, at least not from the earlier Jewish point of view. Um, I'm proud that an abnormally high percentage of Nobel, based on what I've heard, Nobel Prize winners are Jewish. there are a lot of fields that Jews have, I would say, it seems, have dominated in. There's a phrase that excuse me. There's a phrase that people have characterized as being anti-Semitic, but actually I take it as a compliment. That the phrase "Jews control Hollywood." Well, I don't. It depends on what you mean by control. I don't know about controlling Hollywood, but I know that there were a number of Jews who were influential in Hollywood, and I know when you go through who writes these screenplays, who works on these movies, you see a lot of Jewish names. Steven Spielberg, for one. Bob Hope. I mean, if you go through history, Steven Spielberg, Bob Hope, Rodney Dangerfield, Howard Stern. I think there's something I could just go on and on, but there's and in screenplays, by people they're not famous people, they're not directors, but the Joel Silverstein, you see their names in the background, like written by and so forth. I think there's a reason for that. Law too. There's a stereotype of Jews being dominant in law, or at least clever, have a presence in law. I think there's a reason for it. I think the Jewish culture. First of all, there's the Torah, the Bible in general, and there's a different take on it. The Christians, I'll just say loosely in general, Christians seem to take it as faith, this is the word and you must preach it. The Jews don't have that at all. They're not into proselytizing at all. And I want to say that this video is not intended to be proselytizing. It's simply showing the world what the Jewish mindset is. And I can only say from my point of view and from what I've learned, I'm pretty scholarly in my heritage. The Jewish take on it is that they read it. It's like the Bible study. I guess I haven't been to adult Bible study for Christians, but in Judaism, the stories are not taken as literal fact that you must preach and push on others. Excuse me. Bruce Thompson. Okay, thanks. You may not know it, but today is the following day, and so I shaved. So sorry if this appears red. Tends to do that. My skin, I guess, is sensitive, or I shave too closely. Anyway, you don't want to hear that. Okay, back to what I was talking about, Bible study. Now, I don't know how adult Christian Bible study goes along. My impression is that there's more, there's little study, there's more preaching. That's only my impression. I'll tell you what it is. It's like in Jewish Torah study. Torah, you could call it Bible study. Torah study means that Torah refers to the 5 books of Moses, or what Christians would call the Pentateuch, because that's a foundation upon which everything else is based. All the other Judaism is really built upon the 5 books of Moses. So you are in a room. You should be Jewish tradition has it that you don't study yourself. It's better to have at least 2 people studying partners, at least one other studying partner. And there's a term for it. It's chavorim. Not sure of the exact definition, like etymology of chaver or chavorim, but loosely it means a study partner or a companion. Maybe the best way is like companion, study companion, because that way the companion can bring up things that may not have occurred to you. So it broadens your horizons when you're studying. You can become so locked you don't notice certain things. Okay, so I went to the temple that I grew up in, and in our study group, it was interesting that I'm born Jewish. My mom was Jewish. My dad is Irish, was Irish Catholic, but he didn't live. He only visited like 5 times when I was growing up. So I identify as a Jew, and I'll never change. Proud to be a Jew. Um, I would go in, and these sessions were with primarily um, converts, like Christian converts. And so immediately I felt more active as a Jewish scholar, and more focused on what the text actually said, and more just genuinely more curious. Um, so you may know that the year is split up into a portion of the Torah each week, and it's linear. We start with Genesis and we go all the way, and then towards the end, at the end of the year, it's Deuteronomy, and then there's a special ceremony in which it's the Torah is full, the scroll is uh, scrolled back, and it's paraded around, and we read the end of Deuteronomy and then the beginning of Genesis again. So it's the entire year. It's split up into linear weeks, and there's a portion for each week. The entire portion, I mean, the text is split into weekly portions. It's not just a verse or something. So the rabbi on Friday evening being the beginning of Shabbat, and Saturday morning being the rest of Shabbat, um, picks something from that portion to give a sermon about. And Jewishly, it's very traditional to apply that to, well, either to apply it to modern society, or to draw out more accurately, I want to say, draw out some theme, some important theme that he or she wants to talk about. That's something else. I want to talk about the three primary, or four, I guess, primary denominations of Judaism. There's Reform, which is what I grew up with. There's Orthodox, and there's Conservative, which is in the middle, and then there's Reconstructionist. Those are the four primary ones. People lump in Kabbalah and so forth, Kabbalists and so forth. I don't consider that Kabbalistic. I don't consider Kabbalah a separate denomination. It's not. It's purely just traditional, mystical tradition and teaching. There's no separate denomination. And also, I want to say that the denominations themselves aren't so separate. You have, unlike Christianity, forgive me, I'll speak very Jewishly, and with a bias toward Judaism as being very healthy, very good. So you have the Torah, and you have the oral laws and traditions, all under the term Torah. You have the 5 books of Moses, and you have the Talmud, and you have the other oral laws, and you have traditions and so forth. And they're all lumped together as Torah. And as I've studied, there's speculation. I guess the prevailing speculation is that Torah comes from a term meaning like throwing, and as if it's being thrown or passed from one generation to the next, or the teacher to student. Yireh, I think, is the term, and then Torah is a variation of the term Yireh, which would mean to throw. So there's the 5 books of Moses, and then you have the rest put on top of it. Okay, so a Jew has these commandments and has all this tradition to uphold and to live by. I mean, it's his or her heritage. Okay, so I think it's predominantly in Germany in the 1800s, there was a movement due to like anti-Semitism, and you're probably aware of just how awful people have been to Jews in the past, just all the way through the Middle Ages and so forth. And then also it's probably due to new sciences developing and so forth. For whatever reason, there was a movement that sprang up, as I remember, it was in Germany in the 1800s, to reform Judaism. I mean, literally, like as a verb, reform Judaism, um, and modernize. And so they created, I think it's Episcopalian, they moved the Shabbat from Friday evening and Saturday to Sunday to make it seem closer to what their fellow Christians were like. And um, the rabbi, instead of wearing a typical rabbinical uniform, um, dressed up as more of an Episcopalian priest. And that's when it switched from actual Hebrew, and the prayers being in Hebrew and so forth, to being in, I guess, German or the common tongue of the community, so that they could understand it would be more meaningful to them rather than reciting something in Hebrew, which they may not understand. Um, I guess there's perhaps a comparison with Latin, where there was I forget what it's called, like a pope at some point introduced like a new Christianity or whatever. They moved away from Latin. They moved into English, and um, they I'm reading into it. Maybe they also tried to modernize and so forth. Okay, so there was also speculation about whether we would need to keep certain commandments, like not eating non-kosher foods or animals like pigs and bacon, and mixing dairy with meat and so forth. Maybe we could lessen those commandments, like just not observe them as strongly or at most adherently. That's adherently is a word. So that reform movement sprung up, and it still didn't stop anti-Semitism, but then came so as kind of as a reaction. I don't know whether Orthodox Jews even call themselves Orthodox Jews, but I will just use the label Orthodox. So as a reaction, I suppose, the ones who didn't do that just felt more strongly that they should uphold their Jewish heritage, all of it, all the commandments. If you were to go to a Jew and ask which commandments do you follow, if he's an observant Jew, a quite observant Jew, especially an Orthodox Jew, he would probably say, "Well, they're all important. It's all very important. You don't pick and choose." So, um, so within Orthodox Judaism, you have what's called ultra-Orthodox, where I guess there were Jews in Eastern Europe and other places that held that where certain other traditions came about, and there are certain figures and scholars within Judaism that spread their interpretations and spread their texts, wrote texts and so forth, and so it's becomes like sort of more tribal. Not that they don't believe in Judaism itself as a whole, but it when you get into ultra Orthodox, it becomes more tribal, and they become very, like, almost overly adherent to traditions. Okay, so there's Orthodox, and then like there's a fraction of that that's ultra Orthodox, and then there's Reform. They have kept things up, whereas Reform has in the past modernized and tried to blend in with everybody else. I came from a Reform movement, but of course I'm in Generation X, and during that generation there was a that was when the move, perhaps that was when it began, but it was moving back towards orthodoxy, and saying, no, we're going to teach Hebrew to children, and we're going to actually study the texts more the way Orthodox Jews would. So there's no real fundamental paradigm shift between these movements. It's just a matter of how closely you adhere to the commandments and traditions. I say commandments and traditions because they're all lumped together as Torah. Then I want to say, like, the 1960s, there was a conservative movement. There was a movement that sprung up that I don't know very much about the conservative movement, but I'm venturing to say it's towards orthodox. But there's some things that are lessons or not observed as much, and there's a little bit that it sways away from orthodox and somewhat towards the direction of reform. It's the best way. That's my impression of it. And then there's Reconstructionist, which um, I'll be careful about this. At the outset, they're not as much believing in God or divine source as they are embracing Jewish heritage and Jewish customs and Jewishness as an identity. So they're the most secular. I would venture they're the most secular. So you have ultra orthodox, and you have orthodox, you have conservative, then you have reform, and then you have reconstructionist. So I guess the term reconstructionist would mean that they're trying to reconstruct some form of Judaism so that it's not necessarily believing in a divine being or focused on divine being or divinity, but it maintains and retains and embraces all the wonderful, beautiful aspects of Judaism. Okay, and then you have, I explained Kabbalah is not a separate movement, it's just part of this tradition. And though that's it. So I'm proud that instead of as opposed to Christianity, which has all these split offs like Henry VIII and all these different split offs and Reformation movement and so forth, Judaism is simple. It's cut and dry. It's just a matter of how adherent you are to following the commandments, and they're not just 10. I mean, the commandments. Traditionally, it's said there's 613, and in Christian texts, especially the Christian Bible, its phrase is, "Oh, what a horrible yoke it is, and how horrible you have to adhere to all these commandments and so forth." That's really anti-Semitic because I think intentionally anti-Semitic was trying to persuade people to leave Judaism and go toward Christianity. Like, why do you have to follow these and so forth? First of all, 613, I don't know exactly where it comes from, but I've read that 613, one version of where it comes from is you have 365 days, and you have, I can't remember how many body parts, but those add up to 613. And there's a lot of numerology in deriving, I'm sure, deriving 613. I've even heard something like 611 or 610 plus 3 for some reason. But I think it's 248 positive commandments, meaning positive meanings things you should do, you ought to actively do. And then there are 365, which are more than the 248. There are 365 ones that you commandments referring to things that you should not do. These are negative commandments. You should not do this. You should not do that. So I guess there's a theme in there that there are more commandments saying you should not do certain things than positive commandments saying you ought to or you must do these things. So those would add up to 365. My source for that is from a book that we had gotten in Sunday school. Actually, it's Monday evening school, but it's a religious school. When I was early on, like a sophomore year, like my high school sophomore age, I wasn't in high school religious school. It was just that my high school age of sophomore, I would also go to Monday evening religious school, and that's when we each got this book. And I can't remember. I wonder if I still have it. I'd recognize the cover anyway. That's where I got it from. So this unnamed book. Anyway, that's my source. And then there are other explanations for where the 613 comes from. It's not like they're numbered in the Torah. And I've seen in like the Middle Ages and in ancient times, there are rabbinical scholars who have listed 613, and I've seen them, and they're not necessarily directly from the Torah. It's a mixture of what's been in the Torah, and then they list commandments from other traditions, and so I mean like other aspects of Jewish tradition and heritage. So it's like a hodgepodge kind of 613. Um, Now, what do Jews believe? That there is one being, God. Actually, in the Torah, it refers to God in two names. But there's one being, and that's central. They're not proselytizing. They see themselves, Jews see themselves as a people, and with a nation and a culture and traditions and so forth. And there's been this, um, consequently, because they live scattered amongst other nations, there's more so an emphasis on living together in a Jewish community. Like that's why you would see Jewish communities holding tight together. Now, I'll venture to guess it's less so now as they spread apart and mingle amongst society, other communities. But there is a very strong bond, and it's written into the holidays and the almost daily holidays, the calendar, ritual calendar of Judaism. I'll get into that after this, but okay, so the family is very important, and like extended and other Jews in the area, it's a community. It's thought of as a community. So when a man tries to date and find a woman, actually there's an ancient tradition of a special rabbi. A rabbi simply means you've been trained in a rabbinical school, and you're just basically an expert on there. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't imply any divinity. It doesn't imply that the rabbi is better than you or anybody else or whatever. It's more like a college professor teaching students. The rabbi has been specially trained and is much more knowledgeable and is seen as a guide and someone that a troubled Jew can go to for help and guidance and ethical discussion and so forth. So, right, so there are different kinds. So you go through rabbinical training. There are different types of rabbis. They all go through rabbinical training. There are some rabbis that become cantors, and in addition to that, they also have to learn the special cantillation and singing mark. There are special notations, and there are special ways in which the Torah is sung. Yes, traditionally, every week, when you read from the Torah that for that week, traditionally it should be sung in their special notes and so forth. So it's not just simply read. That's one type of rabbi, in addition to the rabbi that leads a congregation. There's also a rabbi called a moil, who, in addition to having to be trained rabbinically, must have medical training to be able to perform circumcisions. Look up if you don't know what circumcisions are. This is YouTube. Just look it up. And I don't. Then there's another one. I don't think that this necessarily has to be a rabbi, but it's. I want to say shidduch. Maybe I'm mixing up terminology. It's somebody who is a matchmaker, and that's. I guess in a lot of societies, it's culturally a tradition. In Judaism, there's somebody who serves as a matchmaker to match, man or woman, match two people together. And traditionally, the matchmaker isn't paid. However, if it becomes successful, if they do get married, it's traditional to, I think, give a gift or something like that. I should also mention, before I forget, when you're giving a gift, it's traditional to give it in if you're giving money, tzedakah. Tzedakah is a term derived, it's a feminine, the part at the end denotes it's a feminine form of tzedek, which means justice. It doesn't mean charity, it doesn't mean handout or give away or something. It means justice, and I'm guessing that the term means that you're helping to create a more just society by giving tzedakah, or justice, in a feminine form. And justice is a very important part within the Jewish mindset. I'll just call it like the zeitgeist. I'll call it the Jewish mindset. Um, Justice is important. Community is important. Maintaining one's traditions, Jewish traditions and identity is important. Um, and that's why when someone, especially in very traditional communities, when like Orthodox communities, ultra Orthodox, communities, when somebody falls in love and dates somebody, usually it's a man dating a woman who's not Jewish, it's like frowned upon. I was almost going to say shunned, but frowned upon, because it's like that person is leaving this wonderful heritage and being like tempted away by someone. It's not. I'm going to venture to say it's. I say venture to say a lot. Venture to say the woman, the non-Jewish woman, would not be called a Jezebel or something like that. It's not as, I wouldn't say that term is used. I may be wrong, but it's more like temptation, like this sort of, it's ugly that this person is tempting him away from finding someone within his community and within his kind. Okay, and there's a movie by the Canon Group, which is a film company known for spitting out hundreds of movies every year. And there's a movie with Elliot Gould that is about that non-Jewish woman coming in and then tempting someone away, and the other Jews feeling awkward, like he's leaving his Jewish heritage behind. Okay, so going back to study partners and the study group, there's a focus on the actual Hebrew. Let me mention more about tzedakah. It's traditionally, it's given in denominations of 18, because in terms of numerology, all right, let me back up. In the Hebrew language, there are words for 8, 9, these numbers, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. There are Hebrew words if you want to spell out the words for the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you just want to use digits, instead of writing like we would do that to mean 8, we would do that to mean 9. This would be 1, 2. Instead of doing that, the Hebrew shorthand way of doing it is to write the letter that is in the same order in the Hebrew alphabet. So the Hebrew alphabet goes Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud. Yud would be number 10, and then beyond that I can't quite, I think it's Kof, and then Mem is about halfway through the alphabet, Nun, Samech, so forth, all the way to Tav at the very end. So alongside that, Aleph is the first letter, that would be equivalent to 1, and then Bet is second, Gimel is third, Dalet is fourth, and so forth. So if you want to write 4, and you don't want to write the whole word 4, which is Arba or Arbe, you just write Gimel, the letter Gimel, and that stands for 4. It's also used in writing years, because it would be very long to write 5,761. If you just want to, like, what we would use would be 5, 7, 6, 1. The Hebrew way of doing it would be to put in the appropriate letters, just 1 at 4 of them, and that's very simple. So, and then that ties in with numerology, which is part of Kabbalah, the whole thing about that. All right, so that gives you some sense of Kabbalah, a little bit anyway. So back to 18. 18 is a combination of 10 and 8. as I mentioned before, 8 is represented with the letter chat, which looks like this. It looks like an arch. And Yud is the 10th letter in the alphabet that represents 10, and basically it's an apostrophe. It looks like an apostrophe, vaguely apostrophe. So you may have noticed necklaces with the symbol of an arch, and then next to it there is what looks like an apostrophe. That's Chai, which means life. And and then somebody reaches their 18th birthday. That's very important. Well, that's somewhat important. It's recognized as being important. 13, of course, is when 13 years and 1 day for a boy, and 12 years and 1 day. I have that backwards. I think it's maybe 12 years and 1 day for 13. No, boy would be 13 years and 1 day. I think for girls, it's 12 years and 1 day. So they get to celebrate a bit earlier, a year earlier. But anyway, on that day, or during that Shabbat, that's around that birth date and day, they help. There's a bar mitzvah, and the word bar means son, and mitzvah is a term that means, as far as I can understand it, it comes from the term tzava, which means like binding or connecting, like a tie and bonding. Mitzvah means it's an active form of tying or bonding, and it's called that because now the son is bonded to his heritage and commandments, and he states, I am now part of this community, and I'll uphold the heritage and the commandments and so forth. It's a very, very big moment. It's like there's a thing like a Sweet 16 or coming out party. It's something like that, only like tenfold. It's very important, and there's a huge party and so forth. I think it's the conservative movement that introduced, or somewhere along the line, they introduced the bat mitzvah, which would be a female form. Basically, you probably read into that, like the bar mitzvah was for boys, and then at some point, hey, what about girls? There's like a movement for equality, and so the bat mitzvah tradition started up too. Same thing. And now, of course, in ritzier areas like Los Angeles and Beverly Hills, these bar mitzvahs, I'll just say bar mitzvah, read into it bat mitzvah as well. These bar mitzvahs become very lavish and expensive and so forth, because they can afford it. But traditionally, the rabbi gives us regular Shabbat sermon, and now I'm not sure how widespread this is. I know in my Reform congregation, this is what was done. I think this is the way it typically is done. I helped lead the service by reciting from the Torah. When you recite from the Torah, you take what's known as a yad, which literally means hand or finger, and it's a long stick with a usually decorative with a replication of a hand, which, come to think of it, I guess goes against the first commandment, because the first commandment says you're not supposed to sculpt, essentially in so many words, I'm paraphrasing, not supposed to sculpt anything in the heavens, in the seas, or on the land. And if you sculpt something, I don't know how they get away with that, but a hand with a pointing, and it's on a stick, and you use the stick. So that the important thing is your finger doesn't, with its sweat and grime and whatever, and maybe spiritually there's some sense to that too, but you're not touching the Torah scroll page itself, because we really value some of these. Traditionally, it's not like a new book. You just open up the book and you read a book printed by Harper and Collins from 2 years ago. No. You take out a scroll, and it's sense of honor and prestige, not prestige, honor and awe. How old the Torah scroll that you're opening is, and also especially if it's been through the Holocaust or it's been kept in a certain not museum, but kept in a certain temple, or like this scroll that I'm opening was in a Polish synagogue during the pogrom or during the Holocaust or something. It's very important to mention that. I don't want to say very important. It's said with awe, almost like a person. It's that, wow, look at where this scroll comes from. Look what it's experienced. So you don't want to touch the actual scroll because you get finger sweat stains all over it and so forth. So use a pointer to keep track of the wording as you're reading through, especially if Hebrew is not your native language. So that's what I did during my bar mitzvah. I came up and then I read through and chanted, not just speaking it, but I chanted it and I learned how to chant. First, I learned it was, I'm going to guess, like a year or something, or a couple of years in preparation. This is just after I learned I was Jewish. I had to first learn how to read Hebrew, and that's not even learning a lot of vocabulary. That's simply learning how to read Hebrew. And then I had to go to essentially cancellation class, and I was tutored by somebody in how to actually chant as I'm reading along. And to be honest, I was probably so tense and so forth. I was just moving it along and singing, chanting, from what I remembered. And then I gave a sermon about the portion of the week. Actually, I didn't. I didn't know that much about the portion. I should have read it more, I admit. But I introduced myself to the community. I said some things about myself. That's not the traditional way of doing it. But yeah, I was 13 or something at the time. But anyway, maybe 14 because it was a year late. Who knows? Close to 13 at the time. So that's traditionally that. I know my rabbi stepped in and tried to apply what I said to the portion of the week, and that's good that he did that. Thank you. I should have known. If somebody had told me that that's what I should be doing, I would have done that. But anyway, less guidance there. So I told you about so back to 18. So 18 is, so I mentioned 13 is a critical age. 18, ironically or amazingly, is what we in the secular world think of as an adulthood. For whatever reason, 18 is a good, healthy number. So when you give denominations of money, like for tzedakah, you try to give in denominations of 18, like, is it 72? That's like some multiple of 8. You can give in multiples of 18. I don't know about like the opposite way, not multiples, but divisions of 18. I don't know. I don't think so. But it's multiples of 18. You try to anyway. So let me see. So I've talked about denominations. I've talked. Oh, the calendar. I should also talk about the calendar and how tight the Jewish community is, how tight family is. Passover in the Torah itself, meaning the 5 books of Moses. Passover it's just explicitly stated, this shall be for you the head of the year. And so during that Shabbat, well, no, first of all, any Jewish holiday or any Jewish day traditionally begins at sundown, at evening. And I'll clue you in on some aspects of the Talmud. This comes from this tradition of beginning the day at the evening. of the previous day comes from Genesis and comes from chapter 1, where it says there was mixture, and in the English it says evening. It's actually a term in the Hebrew meaning mixture, which I think actually makes a lot of sense. That's one of many reasons why I think Jewish customs and the way things are set up make a heck of a, excuse the expression, heck of a whole lot of more sense than, forgive me, than Christianity. But aside from Christianity, just it makes a whole lot of sense. So the actual term doesn't mean evening or whatever. It's literally mixture, because it's a mixture of day, light, and night. So the phrase is there was mixture and there was morning, one day. It doesn't say the first day. In Hebrew, it means one day, and then there was mixture and morning, a second day, a third day, a fourth day. It doesn't mean the first, the second. That's not what it actually says in the Hebrew. So traditionally, it would begin at evening, and then goes until the next evening. And so this is where the Talmud comes in. The Talmud, let me explain the Talmud. Well, quickly, the Talmud started with somebody in Jerusalem, or tied in with the Second Temple, as I recall, or the Second Temple period. I think it was Judah the Prince that wrote these, I recall, that wrote a series of traditions down, and they happen to be in a certain order. If you go to chaver.com, that discusses it more. The author that maintains that website explained that they weren't just randomly listed; they were divided into topics, 6 topics, or what are called orders, and then there were footnotes added to. There was commentary added to that list of statements, basically, or traditions. And then there was more commentary written on top of it, and then there were footnotes. So if you're reading the Talmud, if you open up the page, it says, it gives what Judah the Prince, if I remember correctly, if that's who it was who made the list, it gives one of his list items, and then then the commentary begins. Rabbi so and so said, and then it mentions further elucidation about this, and then also in the elucidation, it would ask, what does it mean by this? And then it mentions Rabbi so and so explains it like this. Rabbi so and so else explains it as this, and Rabbi so and so added this, da 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 da. So it's a running commentary. So that's the actual Talmud, and then there are footnotes along the sides of the page that merely are footnotes. They mention anecdotes or aspects to put this in context. If you don't understand a certain term or a phrase or something like that. There's a Frenchman, and I can't remember who it was, but there was somebody, a famous Jewish scholar, Frenchman, added in his footnotes, and those have become the standard text of the Talmud. That's how it evolved. So, all right, so that's the Talmud. Where was I going with that? And the oh, right. So evening and morning. All right. So there was a question. When does this mixture begin? When does evening begin? Well, it officially begins when you can see 3 stars. That's one thing that the Talmud has been very, very helpful, and I'm grateful, very grateful that it has come down intact, existed. There are actually 2 versions. At some point when the commentary is being added, it split into what's called a Babylonian, a version of Judah the Prince's original thing with commentary added on in a Babylonian with Babylonian like commentary, and there's some with Jerusalem commentary, like Babylonian version, because I think that's where the that version of it was found or been kept up. In a sense, there's a Babylonian version edition of it, and there's a Jerusalem edition of it. Um, so one thing about it is that it adds a lot of information. There's an incredible amount of contextual information, historical information to let us know um, the context and the meanings behind these different things and what was going on in the culture. It's like an encyclopedia and almost. And the Talmud, the whole Talmud set, is basically encyclopedia size, split up into 6 groups, just like Judah the Prince had them split up. It's 6 categories. So just like the 5 books of Moses are in 5 books, this is in 6 books. But sometimes the books are so large that it takes up 2 books or whatever. So it's more like an encyclopedia set. So anyway, especially when you have tiny print and then you have to add in the commentary and so forth, the page can only fit so much. So that's why you have this huge length. And then usually you have the Hebrew and then maybe an English translation. It becomes huge. Anyway, Jews want the Jewish mindset, as I said before, has several things in it. It's community, tight-knit community. It's Jewish and family to go along. It's a sense of justice, and there's a movement that was helped and pushed further or exacerbated, or just reflected. I'll just say reflected in Kabbalah. The sense of justice or helping heal the world. And it's not to mean like what Christians would think of as like converting the world to Jesus. This has nothing to do with that. It's a sense of making sure that the safeguarding and like seeking justice. And the Jewish mindset is all about what's ethical and building a community, and that's how we think of the commandments. We think of them as also having an ethical aspect to it, and what's more ethical, this or this, and so forth. And that enters into the Talmud a lot, and basically seeking justice. And I suspect that's why many Jews go into law, might even go into politics, but into law, because the commandments are seen by Jews as not restrictions or things you have to obey. They are a way by which we can understand God better. If by studying these traditions and the commandments, we can understand, first of all, what God would want, and it's a relationship. It's like if you have 2 people and they're trying to form a relationship, the relationship is stronger if each person understands, like, is more familiar with the other person, like the certain personality. So I guess crudely speaking, we can understand God's personality better by studying these commandments, and not just studying by rote, but I mean discussing them. That's why you would have it's best to have a study companion as you're going through the Pentateuch or studying some other text of Judaism, because the other person may bring up something that you may not have thought of, and you can discuss and debate and so forth. And there are special, like we would have Sunday school and secular school and so forth. There are special, like religious schools. If you want to be brought up in a strictly like a religious school, I can't remember the term for it. It's a common term. I'm blanking on the term for it. But there are schools like for kids growing up. You are taught. You're given a very, I'm guessing, I haven't gone through it, but from what I understand, you're given a very thorough understanding of the Pentateuch and Jewish and the Talmud and so forth. And from what I understand, or from what I've been told and read, in the first few years, you merely study what the ancient scholars have said. It's sort of like law school. In other words, I'm guessing law schools like this. You are merely taught what the ones before you, the famous people before you, have contributed, and then after that point, you have enough grounding so that you can venture off and you can give your own opinions and give your own. You can. It's like elementary school. It's like before elementary school to high school. You're given some grounded in the sciences and writing and reading and arithmetic and so forth. And then at the college level, you can begin to speculate and broaden your horizons and contribute and work with what you've gained in terms of education from high school all the way back to elementary school. So my understanding is that it's the same with these schools where you just go to the religious school, so you don't go to secular school. And this is not true of all Jews, by the way, but if you go to one of these schools, you're given a grounding, and then at some age, and I'm not sure what the age is, you can begin to use that like at a sort of like a college level way of thinking, where you can like actually more actively discuss what you've learned and apply what you've learned. I shouldn't say apply, maybe like just like basically speculate, and you're more free in terms of more arguing with these earlier scholars. So that's also and part of the Jewish mindset is actively debating, like with Chavarim, your study companion. It's a sign of being an alert scholar and an active Jew if you know your material and you can debate, you can successfully debate and defend your point of view. It's not to say that you're butting heads. Well, sometimes you can seem like they're butting heads, but I would say you should be open-minded a bit. But it's a sign of awe in a Jew who can be able to know his material well, so that he can or she can discuss material with somebody else. You really need to know it well. If you can be able to debate it well with somebody else, that shows that you know your material well. And knowing your Jewish heritage, knowing these materials, is really it's really good. And that reminds me about the term mensch. I'm not sure if it's Yiddish or German, but a mensch is a Jew or just somebody. The term is thrown around whether you're Jewish or not, but I'll just say Jew. It refers to a Jew who is an upright, standing citizen and is charitable, and that ties in with the commandments. He's upholding commandments. He's very ethical, and he's like mature. He's like grown into a man, and he's understanding, and he is compassionate. All these different things. You basically grown into a mature man. I don't mean to tie that in with the bar mitzvah, in which you declare yourself, I'm now an adult, and or as I would say, adult in training, and it has nothing to do with the bar mitzvah itself. It just means a mensch refers to somebody who's a man. The term, I think, literally translates as man, but it's the Jewish concept of a man, which would mean that you're ethical and you care about, you're mature, and it's like a little whiny crybaby. You wouldn't say that that's a real man. Somebody who doesn't care about other people's feelings, and somebody who can't take care of himself or can't take care of others or whatever. Those aren't real men in terms of this. If you think of somebody who's like self-sufficient, who cares about others, who's capable and knows his Jewish heritage and honors his Jewish heritage and so forth, that's a man in the Jewish mindset. I wonder what the female version of that would be. A mensch. I wonder about that. Anyway, so Um, in the in terms of men and women and equality, something interesting. I read something in the Jewish Reform magazine, that in ancient times, actually, there were women in Judaism who were giving sermons as well. But aside from that, that's intriguing. But aside from that, in the Orthodox community, it's much more male centered. You have a congregation split by I think it's the term is a chatzitza, which is a, I don't want to say gate, but it's like a wall with holes in it. And the men sit on one side and the women sit on the other side. And it's so that this is the explanation, the rationale for it. It's so that they won't be tempted by, probably the men won't be tempted by the women, and they will be focused on what's going on, and they will be focused on divinity and what the rabbi is saying and so forth. And I guess you could say the same thing for the women. They won't be distracted by the men or their husbands or whatever. They'll be focused on what's going on stage. And as I mentioned that, I recall that in these Jewish schools, in other words, if you go to an all-Jewish school, I can't remember the term for it. As I recall, it's like segregated out. You just have men and you just have women. So that way, you're not. So you don't have to compromise. Like the boys don't have to compromise to allow for women in their courses and in their teachings, and consequently the women don't have to feel compromised by having the boys come in. They can feel as their own group, and they wouldn't be distracted. One wouldn't be distracted by the other, and I'm venturing to guess there's probably more predominance of school uniforms and so forth. So you're not distracted by these things. And it might lead to higher grades, people taking a more active, serious effort with their studies, which is good. You lose probably some aspects of that, like people, like boys and girls learning how to mingle together better. But anyway, you win some, you lose some. So anyway, back to this congregation, the Chatzitza. Now that's a more orthodox, a more traditional congregations. And which is kind of odd because in Judaism as a whole, it's very family centered. So in my Reform, the congregation that I went to, which is Reform, and probably I don't know about the conservative, there was no chatzitza dividing it. The families would tend to sit together, and there'd be neighboring families, and they would all sit together, as you would probably in a church. So let me see what the time is right now. It's about an hour. I'm going to hold off and save it for another time. But this is an interesting discussion, and I'll see what else I can come up with. Thanks.